Florida State and Clemson are going to soon be available in realignment, and I don't think the SEC needs to do anything.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching, carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. We'll check in on the Huskies in Seattle. We'll go to Morgantown, West Virginia, and the Mountaineers, all coming up on today's show. But we start with the SEC, who are in an even better spot than you think they are. Because you think the SEC, you think a couple things. First of all, okay, that's the first thing we all think of. I hope, and the silky smooth pipes of one Vern Lundquist, transitioning, of course, recently to Brad Nessler when Vern Lundquist took a little bit of a step back. But amongst all that, you think about the teams that you've got in the SEC. You think about the programs. You think about the brands. You think about everything the SEC has come to mean in college football, and you probably think, oh, they're in an advantageous position. I think they're even in an even better position than you think. Here's why. The SEC has thus far been able to maintain its status as one of the two premier conferences in college football. I think the best conference in college football compared to the Big Ten, which is the only one that, of course, can even compare or be in the same category as the SEC. And yet the Southeastern Conference, Greg Sankey and company, haven't even had to expand their geographical reach. Think about that. The Big Ten has become a premier league that people want to be in, that teams and schools, universities want to be in. They're a coast-to-coast league. They went out of their geographical footprint and picked up the Los Angeles market. They went and got USC, UCLA. They went and got Oregon and Washington in the Pacific Northwest on the cheap. Great moves by Tony Petitti and Kevin Warren, and everybody else who's been involved with Big Ten expansion and whatnot. The SEC is still a Southeastern Conference. And so when you think about all these different chess pieces and where could they go in realignment, and how could this school leaving affect them here or there, anything like that, Clemson would be not a complete aberration from, where they are. Of course, South Carolina is literally in the SEC, and Florida is quite literally in the SEC already. So those wouldn't even be new states. But the SEC not having to fundamentally change what it is as a conference and what it means to be a member of that conference regionally and still maintaining its power underscores how well run they have been as a league. And for anybody that, likes to complain about SEC bias and whatnot, look, I think I have these two thoughts simultaneously. It's going to blow your mind. Ready? SEC bias is absolutely real, and SEC bias is absolutely warranted. They're putting the most players in the NFL draft. They're winning the most championships. They're sending the most teams to the playoff. No, I don't love that they have an 8-game conference slate, though they oftentimes work in high-quality matchups with the ACC. Think about a Florida State matchup, for instance. That's, the same in the 12-team era as having a ninth game because that's ninth conference game because that's a legitimate power conference opponent. But to be able to have contained their expansion moves to just Texas and Oklahoma, who, by the way, haven't even played a game in the SEC yet. They're not there. They're still, at this time, technically members of the Big 12 Conference. We know that isn't, of course, going to be the case, but July 1st is when the papers get signed and the logos on the jerseys get changed and everything officially becomes on the website a member of the SEC. And for them to not have to go out and get USC and UCLA or Oregon and Washington, they weren't even tied to any of those schools. They didn't need them because they have built so many elite brands. If you're watching this on YouTube, you may remember that the thumbnail I have on this video has got that SEC logo and it says it just means more. And all that time where the SEC put more money and paid more attention and just cared more oftentimes than other conferences and schools from other leagues, those chickens have come home to roost in the best way possible for the Southeastern Conference because they are in a position of unquestioned strength. And I think if you're the Big Ten, you have to look at the pending, free agency in realignment of Florida State and Clemson and think to yourselves, we might need to go get those moves. But the SEC, they're not thinking that whatsoever. I don't know why the SEC would be thinking we need to go get those schools. Now, it'd be incredibly exciting. It would be fun. But does it feel like there's a need? No, I don't think there's a need in there. The Big 12 needed to get Houston, Cincinnati, UCF, and BYU when Texas and Oklahoma announced they're leaving. They needed to make that sort of move. The ACC needs to find a way to keep Clemson and Florida State in the ACC. That's what they need to do. The SEC hasn't needed to do anything. Heck, I don't even think the SEC needed Texas and Oklahoma. Even if USC and UCLA and Oregon and Washington had gone to the Big Ten, the SEC could still line up just as many national championship caliber programs. If you go up and down the conference affiliations right now and say, okay, how many national championship capable, not necessarily proven, but capable programs do you have in there? In the Big Ten right now, of course, Ohio State and Michigan are in the mix. Oregon and Washington, we know, are in the mix. USC is in the mix. I'd maybe throw Penn State in there. I'll toss the Nittany Lions fans a bone on that front. Have they really been there? No, I'm probably being a tad generous. So why don't we call it 5.5? In the SEC, how many championship-capable programs do you have? Well, you got Alabama. And by the way, I'm not even going to count Texas and Oklahoma. Texas, we know, and Oklahoma also, we know, can get to a championship level. But let's take them out of that here. Alabama, yeah. LSU, yeah. Auburn, yeah. Florida, yeah. Well, we haven't even gotten to Georgia yet. It's an embarrassment of riches down in the Southeastern Conference. And I understand why media outlets have historically been biased towards the SEC. I understand why fans get frustrated with it, but the SEC is not great because the media pumps them up to be. They're just great. And to be in such a position of strength, and they, of course, have added 2 national championship capable programs in there. And look, you could even put Texas A&M into that mix if you would like and say, look, they just haven't had the right coach. That's Josh Pate's argument over on Late Kick that they just haven't had the right coach in place. He may very well be right because they've got the fan support, they've got the location, they've got the facilities, they've got the investment, they've got the money. They do just need the right coach. They haven't been at that level or frankly anywhere that close to it, not consistently over time, but certainly you could see how they arrive into that upper echelon of college football. So I think it's a really, really impressive thing what Greg Sankey has done to have his league in a place where they don't need to make any move. There's no desperate, right? The Pac-12 was desperate. The ACC, I think, is kind of desperate right now to try and find their footing, to try and find the right move, to figure out how you can save yourself. If the Pac-12 goes the rebuild route and takes some of the Mountain West will be in that position where they have to find options and they need teams to come to their conference. The American Conference has been in this position, of course, when they got rated by the Big 12, they went out, got schools like UTSA, they added FAU, they added, I think Charlotte was in there. Like there have been moves that have needed to be made, but it's a pretty incredible thing that the SEC still has its core geography in place and does not need anything and is just operating from a place of utter and complete power and authority. And I don't think they're going to make a move for Clemson and Florida State. I think the Big Ten is a lot more likely because of this reason. I think the Big Ten feels still a little bit like they're trying to keep up or keep pace or stay or get past the SEC. They have not passed the SEC even with these big-time moves to get Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. They have not passed the SEC. Not yet. Florida State and Clemson, that could put you over the top. But right now, SEC is still top dog. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, as well. Do you know who has the most underrated transfer portal class because of the spring window right now? We'll tell you coming up next. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. Not up, it goes down. They go down. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can get anything that you want over at Game Time. You can buy last minute and save 60% for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, anything you want. Game Time has got it. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. So go take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off that first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Washington has perhaps had the most underrated spring transfer portal window. To talk about it, we have Roman Tomashoff, host of Locked On Huskies here at the network. 10 players added in the spring transfer portal window. Roman, that's infinite percentage points more than Clemson has added this entire transfer portal cycle. They've added 0, of course. So this spring window has been a productive one for the Huskies. Is that going to translate to more success on the field than some people might expect?
Well, Spencer, they still need to add more is the thing. But I would certainly say so, where there are a lot of the guys that I think could step in and be productive players right away. You think of the big three right off the top. And this isn't just, obviously it's a little beyond the spring window, but it's Will Rogers, it's Drew Azzopardi, the right tackle from San Diego State. It's Jeremiah Hunter, who you and I were just discussing pre-show, who has just been fantastic throughout spring camp. But yeah, absolutely, where the more I look at it, there are guys like D'Angelo Titiali, the center from Portland State, who I think is going to come in and certainly have to probably start right away along this offensive line. I wanted to say compete, but just with the state of this offensive line, he's probably going to have to step in and start right away. You can say the same thing about Enoch Vimahai from Ohio State, who's coming in. Hayden Moore, the linebacker from Michigan, one of the more recent transfers in, he's probably not going to have as much of an impact this year with 4 seniors at the position, but there's certainly going to be a lot of transfers making an impact on this team this year.
So they've added 2 offensive linemen in this spring transfer portal window, and you said they needed to add more. Last time we talked portal here on the show with regards to the Huskies, you said very openly, like, they need to add, I don't know, an entire offensive line, basically. So are the 2 guys they've added, one of them the Portland State center you alluded to, but are they still missing starters, or are they missing depth up front?
Yes, is the answer. So I'll run you through right now my starting offensive line, where right now at right tackle it's Drew Azzopardi. He's got that locked down. He's been excellent. Right guard is going to be a competition. Center is going to be a competition. Left guard, I think when he comes back from injury, Guard Memillar is going to lock down that spot. Like I know the last time I was on here, like I said, he should have been the starter last season before he got hurt and had missed the entire season. Left tackle, there's going to be a competition. So with there were only 10 scholarship bodies in the room, and only 8 of them were able to participate, where a couple of them were weren't able to enroll early at Washington. So it was looking pretty bleak along the offensive line there for a little while. So there still needs to be depth, and you need to find 1 or 2 starters. They missed out on Marcus Bryant, the SMU transfer who chose Mizzou. They missed out on Chris Adams, who had originally committed to Washington out of Old Dominion and then decided to flip to Memphis. So they're still certainly looking for both starters and depth.
Yeah, and that's something I think going into fall camp that is probably the biggest question for Washington. Who's going to be the starting offensive line? Because, look, the impressions of Washington from last year, lost your head coach, you've lost 20, or is it 21 of 22 starters?
20,
yeah, 20 of 22 starters from last year's national championship run. and it's just going to be this big reset. And I think at some level it is. I don't expect Washington to be a Big Ten title contender, especially with their schedule this year. They've got some really, really tough opponents to play. But the more I look at this transfer portal class, Roman, this is a top 10 portal class in the entire country. Now, some of that is volume because they've landed 26 commits, but they've landed 26 commits, and a lot of those guys are going to play. And yeah, Will Rogers is the starting quarterback, and Jeremiah Hunter, who, as we were discussing before we recorded the show, grades as a 3-star transfer on 24/7 Sports. I don't buy that at all. I think that guy is a 4-star caliber player and will be one of the top options this year. So has this spring transfer portal window combined with the first transfer window back in the winter, has that altered your perception or your confidence level about Washington going into this year?
Spencer, first of all, with all due respect, it's 25. One of the guys on the 247 list is still Trey Watson, the Fresno State tight end who committed to Kalen DeBoer and then backed off and is now at Texas A&M. So that's on 247. That's not on you.
My apologies.
Hey, it happens to the best of us. But the more I look at this list, there are going to be so many contributors. And I think that it's going to come down to the offensive line. That's the only way to put it. Because as I look up and down this list, I see Jonah Coleman, who, as I predicted on our show over on Locked On Huskies, one of my bold predictions for the year, is that he's going to have 10-plus touchdowns. I could certainly see that happening. Jordan Shaw is going to come in and start in the nickel. He's been excellent throughout spring camp. You could say the same about Ephesians Prysock on the outside of cornerback. I look at somebody like Isaiah Ward. I've been really happy with him. And these are all guys coming over from Arizona. And then that's a big part of this as well, is a lot of these transfers are members of Arizona's 2024 freshman class, where you look at guys like Rashawn Clark, you look at Jordan Washington, who just transferred in the other day, Damon Williams, probably the biggest piece out of all of this, who's just a super talented quarterback. I've loved watching him. Adam Muhammad, who's running back that I've been really, really impressed with. There are so many guys that certainly are going to make an impact, Spencer, as you said, but there are a couple other guys on this list that are just part of that 2024 class that are counted as transfers that are part of this as well. But they all look like really, really talented pieces that are going to be part of this team for years to come.
Yeah, and there have been a lot of transfers, and they're going to make an impact, but still more work to be done, not just necessarily along the offensive line. Washington's been tied to Arizona State transfer wide receiver Elijah Badger, and I think he is probably the most singularly impactful player in the transfer portal right now. And just for those who might not know or might be confused, you can only enter the portal at a certain time. You can exit at any time. And there are going to be, I talked on a recent episode of the show about the impact players that are still in the portal. Cormani McLean is still in the portal. Elijah Badger is still in the portal. There are a lot of guys, and Badger's a guy at wide receiver who I think can be a wide receiver one. Now at Washington, of course, he wouldn't need to be that. You have Denzel Boston, who you've been impressed with. You have Jeremiah Hunter, who we are both fans of. But if you put Badger into that mix, I think you have a light version, definitely a light version of what Washington's offense was a season ago. Now, Jed Fish calls plays and schemes an offense differently, but you would have a veteran transfer quarterback, and you would have 3 very capable receivers. And I look at that rumor that Badger, pretty sure he was on a visit to Washington, not that long ago. I look at that and go, boy, that would be one of the best offensive lineup of weapons in the Big Ten with Jonah Coleman at running back, because there aren't that many great quarterbacks. There aren't that many great offenses in the Big Ten.
Absolutely. And that's something where I'm still really high on that. I'd love to see that take happen. They did take Kevin Green, a wide receiver from Arizona that looks like more of a depth guy than anything, who's got a whole bunch of eligibility remaining. I would absolutely love to see this offense with Elijah Badger in it, because one guy that you didn't mention is Giles Jackson, who's been really productive when he's around. He's somebody who's just got really sure hands and can just be a slot weapon. I've liked him a lot. Another guy is Rasheed Williams, who I wrote about a little bit over on Huskies Wire, that's had a really strong spring, a former 4-star recruit that's a redshirt freshman that's been just really, really reliable with the first and the second team. But Spencer, you're 100% right. I would love to see, I know I just said it, but I would love to see Elijah Badger in this offense, and Cameron Davis, the other running back, with Will Rogers. If you want to throw Damon Williams out there every now and again to just see what he looks like at the college level, he would have certainly some great weapons to throw to around him. So I would absolutely love to see that. And I'm really curious to see if they do end up taking him with just some more pressing needs, with a third scholarship quarterback being one, a couple more offensive linemen being another, maybe another defensive tackle. And that right there, if you go 2 offensive linemen, a quarterback, and a DT, that's 4 scholarships. And then that you have one more. So if that's Elijah Badger, hey, I'm more than okay with that.
Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies, the latest from Seattle. Roman, thanks as always for stopping by.
Spencer, thanks for having me.
We talked about Washington's underrated transfer portal class. An underrated team is out in Morgantown. That's coming up. Before we get to the Mountaineers, let's get to Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. You've already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game you don't want to miss. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench, download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Let's go to Morgantown. It's been too long since we have been there. Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12, joining me here. West Virginia head coach Neil Brown was, by all accounts, on the hot seat last year, and there aren't a lot better ways. There are better ways to say than what I just said, but anyway, there aren't many better ways to quiet down the hot seat talk than a good old 9-4 season for the Mountaineers. Was that a blip on the radar to you, or is this sustainable?
Gosh dang it, Neil Brown. I think the funniest sentence in the world on May 10th or whatever it is West Virginia football coach Neil Brown. Because a year ago, it was like, oh, poor guy. There was like the hot seat, and then this seat just disintegrated a long time ago and no longer exists anymore. So Neil Brown's just kind of hanging out for a bit before he gets fired. And then the guy stumbles upon 9 wins. And now the question is it sustainable for a guy who returns? There's just bugs everywhere. Welcome to Arkansas. Who returns Garrett Green as quarterback and a backfield loaded with Jaheim White and C.J. Donaldson. Like, those are names in college football. You're like, oh, yeah, I've heard of those guys. And in the Big 12, I think that's going to get you in a pretty good direction. Should West Virginia be just as good this 2024 season? I think so. It's just a matter of a schedule that's not too kind.
It is not kind. Now, I have a rule. We'll get to the schedule in a moment, but I have a rule here at Locked On College Football, Drake, and that's that I am inclined to like you as a team if you are returning some combination of quarterback, coach, and offensive coordinator. If you give me all 3, I tend to like you. Now, Clemson might be the exception because they haven't added a single transfer portal player this offseason. I don't know if I love that when 13 guys have left. They weren't all going to be starters, of course, but we'll see if Clemson. But again, I can't dislike them because you just don't see that level of continuity in college football. Ole Miss is a team I've liked for a long time. Why? Because you got Lane Kiffin, who's the play caller and the head coach. You got Jackson Dart back. Georgia should be the preseason number 1 team. You got Kirby Smart. You got Carson Beck. Texas will be very good. I could keep going. So when I see that, quarterback, coach returning, I lean towards, hey, this should work out. How good is Garrett Green in a Big 12 quarterback class that, frankly, is as strong as it has been in the last few years?
Oh, man, I love the idea that Neil Brown and Garrett Green are coming back together, and it feels like West Virginia has used that chip on their shoulder. That was such a funny quote last year at Big 12 Media Days, as his team was picked 14th in the conference, last place. Neil Brown said, "I promise you this," and everybody's kind of on their toes, ready for the big quote, and he goes, "We won't finish last." It's like, oh, what a stupid thing to say. But then they take that 14 mantra and use it to win those 9 games, Garrett Green being at the forefront of that. He was an electric quarterback, could get it down with his legs too. And bringing him back in the offense with a couple of running backs behind him that are as good as they come in the Big 12, I am confident that continuity puts West Virginia in a good place. That said, look at Kyle Whittingham and Cam Rising. Look at Daniels and Leipold. Look at even an Avery Johnson who started a good portion under Chris Kleiman, or Alan Bowman and Mike Gundy, or Rocco Bacht and Matt Campbell. There are so many of these in the Big 12 this year. There's so much continuity at the quarterback position that how do you now separate West Virginia from the rest of the league? That's the part that's tough to do.
Yeah, it is. And I don't think there's a ton of separation. You look at Colorado even. You got Deion Sanders, you got Shedeur Sanders, and you certainly have, Shedeur might be the best overall quarterback, at least from an NFL standpoint, in the Big 12. But you go up and down, and, before we hopped on to record, we were going up and down the quarterback list in the Big 12, and you go, wait a minute. But before you know it, you're like 8 quarterbacks deep of guys who you expect to be above average. And I think it's going to contribute to the Big 12 being a wildly competitive and fun league. And West Virginia last year, 8-4 in the regular season, won their bowl game. Neil Brown gets doused in mayonnaise because, college football. Why the heck not? I look at West Virginia's schedule this year, Drake, and if you go to our friends at FanDuel and examine their win total, you see it's 6.5. You're like, well, that's kind of low for a team that had a nice year. Then you look at their schedule and you go, wow, 6.5. That might be generous here. Now, I'm not down on the Mountaineers. They have not had some crushing offseason where they're bringing in high-profile transfers and making all sorts of big moves. It's been fine. It's been solid, but this schedule, Drake, for those who are unaware, West Virginia opens in Morgantown against Penn State. I'm sorry, West Virginia fans, you're going to lose that football game. Penn State's a better team. They've got the Backyard Brawl on September 14th that is on the road. Yep. And then, do you think I've said the hard part of the schedule? I got news for you. I haven't. I have not, because Big 12 play begins like this.
Oh, God.
Kansas at home, bye. At Oklahoma State, host Iowa State, host Kansas State, at Arizona. I don't know if you could concoct, without Utah in the mix, a more difficult 5-game stretch there. Can the Mountaineers navigate their way through it? And if they win 3 of those games, they might win the national championship.
Here's the problem, Spencer. If I told you that, and bear with me a bit, Kansas is going to a bowl game. Yeah. Oklahoma State, that's actually what they do. Iowa State's gotten into a groove. Kansas State might win the Big 12. Arizona has Noah Fafita at quarterback. The only reprieve you get is Cincinnati and Baylor, and then you go right to UCF and Texas Tech, who also should be bowl teams. When you're looking at a Penn State and even Pitt, that's 10. We could deduce 9-10 teams from this schedule to go to a bowl game. That's not easy, especially with the spattering of those being on the road. For Neil Brown, they want that. They want the blue-collar, coal miner attitude. They went out there and they did what was impossible, and you all doubted us. But at some point, it gets impractical. This is an impractical schedule. Namely with those 5 consecutive games in conference play where you go, oh, none of them look good. I think Kansas could beat Arlington. Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Arizona probably also make those case. You get those in 4 out of 5 weeks. I don't like that.
No, I don't like it either. And let's not sleep on going to Lubbock on November 30th to wrap up the regular season. Like
maybe fighting for a bowl game there.
I completely agree. And I don't think Texas Tech is going to be in wounded animal mode, barring a slew of injuries like they had last year at the quarterback position in particular. And I expect Texas Tech, who's got a win total of 8.5, to be in that 8-9 win range this year for Coach McGuire there. I don't know how much tougher of a schedule you could draw up. And then because they have the Backyard Brawl rivalry, which I love, they're also tossing in the Penn State game. And for anyone out there who is a college football fan that says, well, Saban and teams, they manipulate their schedules. This is why. Because do you think West Virginia can beat Penn State? Look, I've seen crazier things happen in college football. I once watched Appalachian State beat Michigan. I watched Boise State beat Oklahoma. Like I've seen crazier upsets, but Penn State's a better football team.
Yeah. Well, and asking again, I think you take that as it's the micro, the macro of then asking you to not only beat Penn State or compete in that game, and then kind of go week in and week out of just tough games. It's like, oh shoot, like you couldn't get over the hump in that one, and now I'm going to ask you to kind of do the same thing with a really gauntlet of a Big 12 schedule. And conversely, let's look at Utah's schedule. I love bringing this up because West Virginia's been here for a decade plus. Utah walks in the conference. Here's a 5-game stretch they get. Arizona State, TCU, who God knows what that'll look like.
I kind of like TCU. I don't hate TCU's offseason. I like the Andy Avalos hire.
Houston,
BYU. Not great.
Colorado.
They're okay.
That's your 5-game. Like Utah looks at that and goes, oh, hell yeah. Welcome to the Big 12, baby. Whereas West Virginia is duking it out with Noah Fafita, Jalen Daniels, and Avery Johnson in consecutive weeks.
Yeah, I think that is a stark contrast there. And Utah's got to look at that 5-game stretch, and they probably see it the same way I viewed the pizza we brought home for dinner earlier, and I was incredibly hungry. Let me tell you, the pizza did not have a chance. 3 slices were gone in about 150 seconds. It was just completely one-sided, utter annihilation. Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12, fantastic as always. Thank you, Drake.
Yes, West Virginia, I think you're a good football team. Your schedule just kind of sucks.
They're the Florida of the Big 12. Why don't we call them that? And that's where we're ending the show, because that's the best thing I've contributed today. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.